When I started taking oxycodone 2 months ago,
would have never stayed on it. He would never got on it.
It wasn't purchased from a dealer. She told her relatives about it. She didn't even doubt it. Because her doctor gave her a remedy, a tiny medication that was clinically approved, legally prescribed, and advertised as safe when the pain became intolerable. It first performed just as promised. Everything seemed under control, the agony subsided, and life was bearable once more. However, she was unaware, and no one informed her that this medication was subtly altering her brain, in addition to relieving pain. After 2 months, she was unable to quit. She didn't recognize herself a year later. 13 years later, she had vanished. This is not the tale of criminal gangs or illicit substances. This is the story of a system that operated in plain sight, approved, trusted, and protected. And by the end of this video, you'll understand how something designed to heal became one of the deadliest forces in modern history. The trust trap. We are raised to believe that the system is designed to keep us safe. Because your doctor is qualified to assist you, you have faith in them. Because medical research is intended to be supported by evidence, doctors have faith in it. Additionally, regulatory bodies that say they put safety first have approved such research. Patient to physician, physician to science, and science to regulation is a chain of trust. However, what happens if the entire chain is subtly impacted? A potent new painkiller that sounded almost too good to be true, strong enough to manage extreme pain, yet safe enough for long-term use with little chance of addiction, came onto the market in the late 1990s. Not only did that message persuade patients, it also persuaded physicians. Prescriptions skyrocketed after physicians started to believe it. At the time, nobody knew that this was more than just a medical advancement. Rather, it was the start of a meticulously constructed delusion that would gradually lead millions of people into dependency before they even realized what was going on. The first dose. Jennifer's story. Jennifer's life wasn't unusual. She was 28, balancing work, family, and responsibilities like millions of others. Her days were busy but stable, filled with routine and small moments of normalcy. That changed in an instant when a truck ran a red light and collided with her car. The crash left her with multiple spinal fractures and a level of pain she had never experienced before. In the hospital, she wasn't thinking about addiction or long-term consequences, she just wanted relief. Her doctor prescribed a medication that was becoming increasingly common at the time, OxyContin. He reassured her it was effective and safe, something she could take regularly to manage her pain, and at first, it felt like a miracle. The pain dulled, her body relaxed, and she began to regain a sense of normal life. But beneath that relief, something else was beginning. Something invisible, gradual, and far more dangerous than the injury itself. The hidden mechanism. What makes drugs like OxyContin so dangerous isn't just their strength, it's how they interact with the brain. When Jennifer took that pill, it didn't just block pain signals. It triggered a powerful release of dopamine, the chemical responsible for pleasure and reward. Her brain quickly learned to associate the pill with relief, comfort, even a sense of calm. Over time, this process reshaped her brain's chemistry. The same dose that once worked perfectly began to feel weaker. This is tolerance, the body adapting, requiring more of the drug to achieve the same effect. But it doesn't stop there. Soon, the body becomes dependent, meaning it can no longer function normally without the drug. When the medication wears off, withdrawal symptoms begin: intense discomfort, anxiety, sweating, and a deep, restless pain that feels impossible to ignore. At that point, taking another pill isn't about feeling good anymore. It's about avoiding feeling terrible. And that shift from choice to necessity is where addiction truly takes hold. The architects behind the curtain. While patients like Jennifer were unknowingly slipping into dependency, there were people at the top who understood exactly what this drug could do. The company behind OxyContin, Purdue Pharma, wasn't just selling a medication, it was executing a strategy. And behind that company stood the Sackler family, a name associated with wealth, prestige, and philanthropy. Their donations funded museum wings, university programs, and cultural institutions around the world. To the public, they represented success and generosity. But internally, they were overseeing one of the most aggressive pharmaceutical campaigns in history. This wasn't a case of ignorance or oversight. They had access to data, research, and internal reports that revealed the risks. Yet instead of pulling back, they expanded. Because what they saw wasn't just a medical product, it was a financial opportunity unlike anything before. The sales machine. Purdue understood a critical truth. Patients don't choose prescription drugs, doctors do. So instead of marketing directly to the public, they focused on influencing the people with the power to prescribe. They built a massive sales force, trained to speak confidently, present data persuasively, and build trust with physicians. These representatives visited clinics, hospitals, and private practices, delivering a consistent message. OxyContin was safe, effective, and carried a very low risk of addiction. They backed this claim with statistics, most notably the idea that less than 1% of patients would become addicted. It sounded precise, scientific, and reassuring. But the reality was far more complicated. That number came from a limited and misleading source, yet it was repeated so often that it became accepted as fact. Doctors, trusting the information they were given, began prescribing the drug more freely, and with each prescription, the reach of the drug and its consequences expanded. Redefining addiction. As more patients began showing signs of dependency, Purdue introduced a concept that would become one of the most controversial ideas in the crisis: pseudo-addiction. According to this theory, behaviors that looked like addiction, asking for higher doses, seeking early refills, appearing desperate, weren't signs of dependency at all. Instead, they were interpreted as evidence that the patient's pain wasn't being adequately treated. The solution, therefore, wasn't to reduce the medication, it was to increase it. This idea fundamentally changed how doctors interpreted patient behavior. Instead of recognizing addiction, they saw untreated pain, and instead of pulling back, they pushed forward, prescribing higher and more frequent doses. This created a self-reinforcing cycle, where the drug itself caused the symptoms that justified its continued use. It was a system that fed on its own consequences. The explosion. The results were dramatic. Prescriptions skyrocketed from hundreds of thousands to millions within just a few years. OxyContin became one of the most widely prescribed painkillers in the country, used not just for severe conditions, but for everyday injuries and chronic discomfort. It spread into every corner of society, urban and rural, young and old, wealthy and working class. At first, the increase in prescriptions didn't raise alarm. After all, it looked like progress, more patients receiving treatment, more pain being managed. But beneath the surface, dependency was growing. Emergency rooms began seeing more overdose cases. Families started noticing changes in behavior. And slowly, a pattern began to emerge, one that couldn't be ignored forever. The 3 waves of crisis. What followed wasn't a single event, but a progression, 3 distinct waves that reshaped the crisis over time. The first wave was driven by prescription drugs like OxyContin, where patients became dependent through legitimate medical use. The second wave began when access to prescriptions tightened, pushing many individuals toward heroin, a cheaper and more accessible alternative that produced similar effects. Then came the third and most deadly wave, fentanyl. This synthetic opioid was far more potent than anything before it, often mixed into other drugs without the user's knowledge. It required only a tiny amount to cause a fatal overdose. With fentanyl, the margin for error disappeared. What once carried risk now carried near certainty, and the death toll rose at an alarming rate. The final chapter. Jennifer. Jennifer's journey followed this exact path. When her prescriptions were reduced, she struggled to cope with the withdrawal. Her body had become dependent, and without the medication, even basic functioning felt impossible. Desperate to avoid the pain, she turned to alternatives she once would have never considered. What started as a prescription had evolved into something far beyond her control. Over the years, her life unraveled, relationships strained, stability lost, and hope diminished. Then one day, She took what she believed was a normal dose. But it wasn't. It contained fentanyl. Within moments, her body shut down. She didn't get a second chance. Her children found her. A scene that would stay with them forever. And it all traced back to a decision made years earlier to trust a system that promised to help her. The ending that isn't an end. As the crisis became impossible to ignore, legal action followed. Lawsuits were filed, investigations launched, and public attention intensified. The company behind the drug eventually declared bankruptcy, a move that allowed it to restructure and settle claims. But the individuals at the top, the ones who built and directed the system, remained largely protected. Wealth had been moved, assets secured, and legal strategies carefully executed. Settlements were reached involving billions of dollars. But for many victims and families, the outcome felt incomplete. No prison sentences, no full accountability, just a resolution that raised more questions than answers. It left people wondering whether justice had truly been served or if the system had once again protected those who knew how to navigate it. This isn't just a story about one drug or one company. It's a story about trust, how it can be built, manipulated, and broken. It's a reminder that the most dangerous systems aren't always hidden in the shadows. Sometimes they exist in plain sight, supported by institutions we rely on every day, and by the time the consequences become visible, the damage is already done. If this story made you think differently, if it opened your eyes even a little, make sure you like this video and subscribe, because there are more stories like this, and the next one might be even closer than you think.